Mr. Speaker. Back in December, President Obama gave a major speech regarding the United States policy towards Cuba. The President said, quote, "I do not believe we can continue doing the same thing for 5 decades and expect a different result," close quote. In other words, the President is saying that when something isn't working, we need to try a new approach. I wonder if the President and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle agree that we should apply that same standard to our nation's education policy. As a former member of the Alabama State School Board, former Chancellor of Post-Secondary Education for Alabama, I think it's time for a change. For the last 50 years, federal education policy has failed our students, especially our nation's poor students who need us the most. Just look at the statistics. Only 38% of high school seniors can read at grade level, and just 26% are proficient in math. Survey after survey shows that the United States is lagging behind other countries in terms of education. We clearly need a new approach, and that is why I was proud to support the Student Success Act yesterday in our Committee on Education and the Workforce. For too long, the focus has been on the needs and wishes of Washington special interest groups instead of the needs of those who matter the most, the students. It's time we change that. Immediately, 2 glaring flaws come to mind when looking at current policy. First, our local teachers and administrators are drowning in paperwork and mandates. While only 10% of the funding for K-12 education comes from the federal government, the General Accountability Office has found that 41% of the paperwork comes from the federal level. That's unacceptable. Second, Title I funds, which are intended to support our nation's most vulnerable, are picking and choosing winners by forcing money to some schools and not allowing that money to others. The money should follow the student. We shouldn't allow students to remain stuck in failing schools. Every child deserves a fair chance. Mr. Speaker, this top-down, heavy-handed federal approach to education is not working. And frankly, it is outdated. It is not the 1960s anymore. There are more than 3 television networks. We aren't all eating Wonder Bread. Our phones aren't rotary phones tied to the wall. And our education system shouldn't be stuck in the 60s either. Instead of focusing on special interest groups, let's turn the focus to students, parents, local leaders. While the other side is always quick to point out the D.C. special interest groups that stand by their failed approach, the Student Success Act is supported by the National School Boards Association, which is made up of more than 90,000 local school board members. These are the very people who are actually dealing with federal education policy and how it actually works on the ground every day, and they want a new approach. Democrats and Republicans in these local school boards want a new approach. Our teachers need the flexibility to innovate. That's why the Student Success Act reforms a patchwork of highly scoped grant programs and instead creates a local academic flexible grant, which allows local schools to spark innovation and use teaching methods that work best for their students. During committee debate yesterday, my colleagues on the other side were so committed to these same old failed education policies that they even defended the universally disliked highly qualified teacher requirement. While I agree we need the best teachers possible in the classroom, who are federal bureaucrats in Washington to decide what makes you highly qualified? Teachers in Southwest Alabama and all across our country agree that the highly qualified teacher provision is simply not effective. Yet my colleagues on the other side and their special interest buddies refuse to give up power and allow us to move in a different direction. It's time for the federal government to get some humility. Washington bureaucrats don't know how to educate our children, but local superintendents, school boards, teachers, and principals do. So let's empower them. It's time we restored local control over education policy and put power in the hands of those who know our students best. Let's put the focus on the student for once, and that's exactly what this act does. I think the President may be onto something. We shouldn't continue with the same failed education policy that has failed us for decades. We should get away from this centralized approach to education that has failed the students throughout America. Mr. Speaker, the Student Success Act offers that new approach. And I urge the leadership of this House to bring the Student Success Act to the floor for a vote, and let's empower parents and local education leaders. And for once, let's put the students first. And I yield back.